In this section, we've talked all about the Tech Plus exam, and we also covered all of the various topics that we're going to be discussing throughout this course. Additionally, the past few videos have been focused on understanding some of the concepts as it relates to computers and computing in general. The first topic we talked about was exploring computers. We talked about the different types of devices, from specialized devices to non-specialized devices. Then we went into notational systems. We talked about how data is actually utilized by computers in the form of zeros and ones. We also talked about hexadecimal or hex. We talked about ASCII as well as Unicode, and we talked about everything as it relates to notational system. Then we talked about units of measure. And remember, we have units of measure both for data storage as well as for data transfer. We talked about different types of concepts like throughput, and we talked about different types of concepts like data bandwidth as it relates to internet usage. We talked about various types of file sizes like bits and bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, as well as terabytes. We also explored some of the common types of measuring storage devices. So we talked about storage devices from hard drives to solid state drives to USB drives. We're going to be covering all of those in much more detail in the next section and throughout this course, but we introduce those concepts so that you can start to understand them from a basic level. From there, we talked about troubleshooting methodology. If you're looking to get a career in technology or tech in general, you're going to need to know how to troubleshoot. No matter what career, no matter what role you're getting into, if you're going into anything technology related, you better be prepared to troubleshoot. We talked about the 7 main steps of troubleshooting that you need to understand. Use these both on the Tech Plus exam when you're answering questions and use them in your day-to-day career. You're going to be using this all throughout your life, so make sure that you understand the various troubleshooting steps, best practices, and overall methodology. We also talked about some of the basics of computing. We talked about the different types of computer parts, from the CPU to the RAM to our storage devices, and we're going to be covering these in far more detail in the next section when we start talking about physical computer devices. And moving on here in this section, again, we primarily covered the basics of computing. These concepts that we talked about, they're all going to be important as we move forward in this course. So everything that you learned about is going to be covered as far as computer components, computer infrastructure, networking, virtualization, cloud computing, and more. Make sure that if you haven't already, take some notes, review what you've learned, and be prepared for the next section. Let's talk about some different types of concepts that you'll need to know for the exam. Now let's talk about some exam tips for this section. So overall, concept beats math and it beats conversions. Don't worry about doing some of the crazy conversions. They just want you to know some of the concepts we covered, such as computers using binary, zeros and ones, computers using bits and bytes, and that humans use decimal. Hexadecimal exists to make binary readable, and overall, everything that we covered, you need to understand just that computers use binary, humans use decimal, and there needs to be a conversion in order for computers to understand through their zeros and ones, and in order for us to understand how the computers are thinking or processing. From there, we went over bits and bytes that you will need to know for the exam. So lowercase b, remember that means bits, and uppercase b, that means bytes. Remember, 8 bits is 1 byte. Lowercase b or bits is mainly used for speed or throughput, especially when we're talking about internet speed or network speed. Uppercase b or bytes is mainly used for storage or long-term memory or long-term storage. If the question mentions download speed, make sure that you understand it's most likely referring to bits. If it mentions file size or local storage or any sort of file, you might want to pick bytes there. So make sure that you remember this concept. This can get a little bit confusing though, because some of those questions, they're not very advanced in the exam, but you need to understand the difference between bits and bytes, how they're represented here, and what they're mainly used for. Next up is CPU versus RAM versus storage. CPU is for processing, calculations, and execution. RAM is temporary, it's volatile, and it runs programs while the computer is powered on. Storage or long-term storage or solid state drives or hard drives, things like that, that's permanent, and that's what's known as non-volatile. An exam trick here is that data is gone after shutdown. That's a RAM thing. That means volatile. Data surviving a shutdown, for example, the computer powering off or getting restarted, that's our long-term storage like our hard drives and our solid state drives. From here, we have our final exam tips for this section. General purpose versus specialized devices. Remember, our general purpose, they do many tasks. They run many different apps, applications, software, things like that. Our specialized devices, on the other hand, those have one main job. Normally, they're very niche, very specialized. They're faster at that specific job. And just remember, if one thing does something extremely well, and it's mainly made to do that thing, it's a specialized device. Binary, hex, ASCII, and Unicode. We've talked about this already quite a bit. Binary, zeros and ones, are bits and our bytes. Hex is shortened binary, 0 to 9, A through F. These are the main sort of representations of hex. ASCII is basic English characters, so our letters. And then Unicode is global languages plus emojis. If any emoji is mentioned, that's Unicode. So keep all these in mind. These will come up in the exam, but again, don't worry about conversions. Just understand what each one of these is. And also remember, as humans or as people, we interpret numbers through decimal. We don't interpret numbers through binary. Computers interpret numbers through binary or zeros and ones. We as humans interpret numbers through decimals. The last one here, 6, is troubleshooting methodology or troubleshooting. So CompTIA is going to throw out questions on troubleshooting. They're not going to be complex. Don't worry. Just understand the 7 steps of troubleshooting: identifying, researching, forming a theory, testing that theory, implementing that theory or that fix, and verifying that the fix is working, and then documenting that fix. If a system is broken and nothing has been tested yet, make sure you identify the problem. Do not fix it. One more thing with troubleshooting, again, always make sure that when you're troubleshooting and when you're actually looking for a fix, or you're going through and you're forming your theory, make sure you start with the most simple things first. We covered that in far more detail, but just remember, start with the most simple fixes first whenever you're troubleshooting. This is going to be the last portion of this video. If you'd like, you can skip this. If you want 6 simple practice questions to go over, go ahead and follow through with the rest of this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you read through each one here. I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm just going to explain the right answers. So pause the video now for questions 1 through 3, and then mark down what you think is the right answer. And now I'm going to go into the explanations. So pause the video now. All right. So number 1, the correct answer: why do computers use binary instead of decimal? Computers use binary instead of decimal because of C. Computers process electrical signals as on and off states. That's what binary is. It's our zeros and our ones. Remember, 0 is our off state, 1 is our on state. It just does with electronic signals. That's how our computers interpret things, is through binary, zeros and ones, on and off. Which unit is most commonly used to measure internet speed? That is m lowercase b ps. Anything per second is most likely to do with internet or network speed. These others are for long-term storage. So m uppercase b, g uppercase b, k uppercase b, those are our long-term storage. Per second, usually we're talking about some sort of transfer, and that is our megabits per second, not bytes, megabits, because it's lowercase b. Next up, our last question is: which component temporarily stores data while programs are running and while the computer is on? That is B, RAM. Remember, our storage drives, like our solid state drives, hard drives, flash drives, SD cards, those store data in the long term. They're not temporary. Our RAM stores data temporarily. So if you ever see a question and it says what temporarily stores data, that's RAM. If it's long-term data storage, when the computer, even after the computer is powered off and on and off and on and off and on, that's our storage drive, hard drives, solid state drives, things like that. Next, these are our last questions. Go ahead and pause the video now, and I'll let you write down your answers. All right, so let's go in number 4 first. Which device is considered a specialized device? The specialized device here is D, which is router. The reason why that is because the router performs one main job. That's to connect you to the internet. Provide out a Wi-Fi signal. That way you can connect to the router, and then you have a Wi-Fi signal on your device, and you have a Wi-Fi connection. Laptop is not right. Smartphone and desktop PC is not right, because all of these each do multiple different functions. They do dozens of different things. Number 5, which character encoding supports multiple languages and emojis? That is D, Unicode. Because remember, Unicode is the only thing that we've talked about that supports emojis specifically and multiple languages. ASCII supports letters, but it does not support emojis or multiple languages. Hexadecimal does support letters and it supports numbers, but hexadecimal does not support emojis. Binary is only zeros and ones. Number 6, an IT/help desk technician receives a help desk ticket for a user who is unable to print. So probably something is wrong with the printer or something like that. What is the first troubleshooting step? That is the correct answer for number 6. Is the first troubleshooting step is to identify the problem. That's the first part of our 7-step process for troubleshooting. And those are all the questions for this practice area of this video. Overall, that's it for this section. We've reviewed a lot of different information, and if you're feeling confident, you've done your review, you've taken notes, and you've watched all the videos, go ahead and move on to the next section where I'll see you next.